Avalanches don't discriminate. They're equal opportunity killers, and they affect everyone in the mountains. Whether you're snowboarding, skiing, snowmobiling, sledding, cross-country skiing, hiking, snowshoeing, extreme snow angeling. If you live close to snow-covered mountains, you need to know about avalanches. It really just goes with the territory.
Everyone's really excited. A fresh storm had just come in and dropped over 2 feet of new snow. Just blasting rock and roll music, and you get to the exit point. So Mike was finishing his ski cut, and instead of waiting, he just charged right into the slope. And in his first turn, a huge rooster tail of powder came up, and everyone in the group started cheering, "Yeah, go get it!" And then in his third turn, we saw the slope just start to crumble completely. Your heart just sinks because you realize we just screwed up big time. Even though, you've got this organized rescue and you've got people getting to him within 15 minutes, you don't always get that luck that you're gonna get down there and everything's gonna work out all right. Some of the medical staff initiated CPR, but about 40 minutes after the avalanche had occurred, they had ruled his time of death. After the accident, when we were driving home, I thought, those 3 turns, that wasn't worth it.
Avalanche accidents are so tragic because they affect the entire winter community. I've personally experienced what it feels like to lose friends in an avalanche accident, the devastating ripple effect it has on everybody in the community.
What is an avalanche? There's a lot of different kinds of avalanches, but the kind that causes the most trouble are what we call dry slab avalanches. A slab avalanche is like a monster in a horror film. It lies underneath the perfect facade of this enticing powder. And it's just waiting for a trigger to come along, like you, to collapse that weak layer, and then that collapse just goes outwards in all directions. The slope just shadows like a pane of glass. There's no escape. It rockets down the hill, bounces you off trees and rocks on the way down, tumbles you over a cliff. I mean, does any of that sound dangerous to you?
I was not aware, and I did not comprehend the dangers that were out there that day. When I triggered the avalanche, it wrapped me up immediately. Not a second later, I was hit in the back with what felt like a truck. I didn't even have a chance. I ended up laying there in the snow with 2 broken femurs and my broken left arm for between 7 and 8 hours. I've had a total of 4 surgeries, still in therapy 3 days a week, trying to learn how to walk again and get use of my body again.
Avalanches are very violent events. 1 out of 4 people are killed by the trauma of hitting trees and rocks on the way down. And after they tumble you to the bottom, then the avalanche debris instantly sets up like concrete. You can't just pop up out of this. Somebody else has to get you out of the snow.
Really fun day. It was beautiful powder snow, blue skies, sunshine, just pow shots, nothing extreme. We weren't trying to get gnarly or anything. Came around the corner, dropped in. It was great, and then saw cracks shoot out all around me. I did see like the sky for a moment, and then just a whole wave of snow went over my face. I had like a moment of, maybe I can just punch through to the top, and as soon as I tried to move at all, I realized that I couldn't even bend a finger.
The most important avalanche skill to learn is how to read avalanche terrain, which mainly means judging slope steepness. Almost all avalanches occur on slopes steeper than 30 degrees, but you know what? When the snow is sketchy, we can still have lots of fun playing on mellower terrain. We just want to make sure we're not on, underneath, or even connected to steeper slopes. The bottom line is the only time we should even consider getting into steep terrain is when we have safe avalanche conditions.
Some slopes are going to produce much worse outcomes should they avalanche than other slopes. For example, if you're above a bunch of trees, rocks, cliffs, or you're going to get washed into a lake or a gully, The outcome of getting caught in an avalanche like that is much worse than if you're in some big wide open meadow.
The difference between riding in a ski resort and riding in the backcountry is really night and day. In a ski resort, we use explosives and terrain closure to minimize the risk of avalanches to our customers. But outside the ski area, once you step just 2 feet over that rope line, you're in a totally different environment.
Anybody that's going into the backcountry or thinking about going off-piste at a resort really needs to understand that it's a totally uncontrolled environment. There isn't any ski patrol, they're not bombing or doing any avalanche control. It can be really dangerous. So essentially you need to be, your own avalanche expert.
So in 9 out of 10 avalanche fatalities, they're triggered by the victim or somebody in the victim's party, which is actually good because it's not like getting struck by lightning. We have a choice. That means if we learn something about avalanches, we can avoid getting caught in avalanches.
Avalanche safety can seem totally overwhelming, but there is a systematic, step-by-step process that can keep you alive in avalanche terrain. Just knowing 5 basic things can prevent most avalanche accidents. Get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way.
Everyone who goes into backcountry avalanche terrain needs basic avalanche rescue gear.
You need an avalanche transceiver, a shovel, and a probe. And you need to practice a lot to know how to use all of this gear, because your friend only has about 15 minutes to live buried beneath the snow.
A lot of people also use an inflatable avalanche airbag backpack that will help them rise to the top of avalanche debris. How well does this avalanche rescue gear actually work? Well, for 1 out of 4 people killed in an avalanche, they're gonna die from trauma. They're gonna hit trees or rocks on the way down the slope. So avalanche rescue gear isn't gonna do anything for them. The rest of them die from asphyxia, from breathing their own carbon dioxide underneath the snow. But it doesn't have to be that way.
If everyone wore an avalanche airbag backpack, as well as an avalanche transceiver, 2 out of 3 people who die from asphyxia would still be alive.
The bottom line is, avalanche rescue gear will only save about half of us. But in order to stack the odds in my favor, I make sure to never go skiing without them.
As sledders, we travel in the backcountry a little bit differently than skiers, but I still need to have my avalanche gear attached to my body. Having it attached to my tunnel does me no good. If I get separated from my sled, I get separated from my safety gear. If your buddies that you ride with don't have the training and the equipment, don't let them ride with you.
So now that you've got the gear, you've got to get the training. So when you take an avalanche course, you're basically getting keys to a whole new world. You'll learn about avalanche terrain, snowpack, weather, rescue. Essentially, you're trying to take the guesswork out of travel in avalanche terrain.
As a first timer just coming in, it's really important to take the right classes and gain all the knowledge before going out in the backcountry.
Getting the training isn't just taking an avalanche class. It's a great start, but really it's about practicing what you've learned. Make it a ritual. Make it fun. Throw down some lunch money and do some time drills. When it comes down to it, it's about having your friends back and knowing that they have yours.
It's not just the skiers that need to get the training, because sleds are taking us further into the backcountry, so we really need to bring our avalanche skills up to the level of our rider skills.
Next, you gotta get the forecast. These avalanche forecasters are pros. They're gonna tell you everything you need to know. They're gonna tell you about the snowpack. They're gonna tell you about the weak layers. They're gonna tell you where avalanches are gonna happen, where you can likely avoid avalanches. All that information is 1 click away.
To get the avalanche forecast, visit avalanche.ca in Canada or avalanche.org in the States.
Before I even get on the snow, I check my local avalanche advisory.
So take the time, get the forecast.
When you're traveling in the backcountry, you gotta get the picture. What's that mean? It means pay attention. Look for recent avalanches. Listen for cracking or wumping that's taking place around you. Look for recent storm snow, wind-loaded snow. Look for rapid thawing. If you look for all of these things, you're gonna get the picture. You're gonna be a safer backcountry skier.
You get out of harm's way in the backcountry by first avoiding suspect slopes and terrain to begin with. We don't want to regroup in avalanche paths, and we don't want to stop or regroup in runout zones.
Some of my best advice I can give you is when we're out hill climbing and there's a bunch of us, don't go park right at the bottom in the avalanche path. Park on the outside, stay out of harm's way.
Just like you ski a slope, one person at a time, once you're at the bottom, get out of the way of the avalanche path.
We want you to realize that avalanches are dangerous, but you can avoid getting caught in them. First, get the gear, but then you've got to get the training before ever going into the backcountry. Next, always check your local avalanche forecast so you can anticipate the given avalanche conditions for the day. You can get the picture by looking for the obvious signs of instability, and you'll be getting out of harm's way by managing your exposure to potentially hazardous slopes.
A lot of times when people watch us in the films, all they see is the action of us shredding these big lines. But what you don't see is the behind the scene, all the prep that goes into making sure that the slopes are safe, checking out the snowpack, waiting for snow to settle, doing all the homework it takes to safely rip the big lines.
All this information is great and incredibly practical. But at the end of the day, if you feel uneasy about something, it's about having the courage to say no and walk away. The mountain isn't going anywhere.
It doesn't matter if you've made thousands of good calls. All it takes is one bad call, and that's one too many. Some days the mountains are screaming, get out of here, and some days the mountains are going, come on in, it's time to party.
Alrighty. So there we go for our Know Before You Go intro video. Whoops. Now, any questions about that video, about the presentation? For those of you that just joined, there was a number of you that just joined, I believe, during that. So thank you for joining us here. That was the intro video. We're then going to now jump into a slideshow. My name is Casey, for those of you that just joined us, and I'm out here in California. So we are going to have some folks at the end of this. If there's questions, please put them in the chat or go ahead and speak up either way, and I'll happily get to those. If there are area-specific questions, we luckily have some local experts for you with us, and they are going to talk a little bit at the end of this about where you can kind of find some more resources that are going to cover your region a little more specifically. Believe it or not, our North American avalanche stuff does not really cover Bulgaria all that well. Not yet. We'll get there. Cool. So without any further ado, we're going to go jump right into the presentation here. Awesome. Cool. So this is the Know Before You Go avalanche awareness presentation. So big thank you to everybody that helped put all of this together. It's been a long process and it's constantly undergoing revision. Avalanche science, like anything else, is constantly making advances. There's a lot of great men and women out there that are studying this stuff to make sure that we can all stay safe. So even once we learn this tonight, it's definitely important that we keep on educating ourselves not only because there's always more to learn and more to practice, but also just because the science changes and we learn more. So if we're going to spend some time in the mountains, it is important that we learn about avalanches. Now, who needs to know about these? Really, anybody. I mean, if you weren't interested in playing in the mountains, I can't imagine you'd be sitting in with us right now. So this is going to apply to all of us, whether or not we're a snowboarder or a skier. We can all get along. Everybody's welcome up there. But everybody needs to know about this stuff. Well, there we go. Now, if you've ever been to the beach, you know, there are dangers there, right? There's rip currents, there's shore breaks, there's critters out there, but it doesn't mean that we don't go swimming. We love the ocean. It just means that we learn about these things and we learn how to do it safely. And it's the same thing about the mountains and avalanches. Just because they exist, it's not a reason to not go out there, but it's a reason to learn about how to avoid these avalanches. So, just a quick map of avalanche fatalities by state here in the United States. Unfortunately, this map's a little out of date. There have certainly been more since this was put together. But the point of this is just to show you that it's not localized to one area. Anywhere that there's enough snow and a slope above 30 degrees, it's possible to have avalanches. And we'll go over that slope steepness here in just a minute as well. Now, similarly to how avalanches don't care about where we are, they also don't care about what we're doing out there. So say you're climbing, hiking, patrolling, just working out there. Maybe you're out building something on a snowy slope. The avalanche doesn't care. It cares about what the conditions are and the added stress that we're adding to that snowpack. In that video, they did mention this point, but I do think it's important to kind of touch on it again. The vast majority of avalanches are going to be triggered either by the person caught or by somebody with them in their group. Now, while this sounds kind of scary, it's actually not, because once we learn about where and how avalanches form, we can learn how to avoid them. Because remember, the best way to avoid getting hurt in avalanches is don't get caught in avalanches. The video's message, you know, we're human beings, we learn through repetition. So we've broken it down into 5 parts to make it kind of easy to digest and to remember. So the first 2 are going to be gear and get training. We put these 2 together because the gear is what you need, and then you got to train with that gear. Now, what do we mean by the gear? Well, these 3 pieces right here are what we'll call the 3 essentials. This is going to be your avalanche beacon or transceiver. Same thing, just a different word. We'll go over these a little bit more. Your avalanche probe, and then your shovel, collapsible shovel. It'll go down in your backpack all nice. We'll touch on these a little bit later here about some specifics about what to look for if you're getting those. Once you've got that gear, you want to start getting some training, and it can be taking a more formalized class from some people in your area. And again, at the end of this, we'll actually talk a little bit about where those resources are available. But it can also be, or it should also be, just training with your friends. You know, if it snows a whole bunch, go outside, bury a backpack with a beacon in it, and maybe put somebody's favorite beverage in there. Whoever finds it first or in the lowest amount of time gets a drink for the afternoon or whatever. But anything to make it fun and just make it more enjoyable to be out there training with your friends. And frankly, you're out playing in the snow. What's better than that? So once we've got the gear and we've started training with it, we're then going to work on getting the forecast and the localized area, you know, where you're at. They're working on getting that out there. And I think the program is starting to develop from what I've been told. So we'll touch on that a little bit more. But by paying attention to what's going on, that's going to let us get the big picture. And by that, I mean, what's going on with the overall snowpack and the overall stability of that. And that's going to be a season-long thing that we're paying attention to. By getting that big picture, that is going to allow us to get out of and stay out of harm's way. Remember, avoidance is our best path. So, what's an avalanche? Well, it's most simple, and that's kind of where we're going to leave it today. An avalanche is snow sliding down a mountainside. We can see these in a couple different forms. The first one that I'm sure many of us are familiar with are going to be loose snow, or sometimes called sloughs. And this can be you're just skiing across a slope and you make a little bit of snow go down. It's that nice loose powder, but you know, that little bit of slough, while it theoretically could knock somebody off their feet, it's not really what we're that concerned about. Now, wet avalanches, while they can do damage, they're generally slower moving and probably not going to hurt a person. I say probably because there's a lot of us out there and a lot of things happen. What we're mainly going to be concerned about today are dry slab avalanches. And this photo up here in the top right, this is a classic example of a dry slab avalanche breaking, and it shatters like that pane of glass. And we'll actually revisit this picture when we're talking about a different aspect here in a little bit. So what I think is really important in this slide right here, I'm just gonna get a little spoiler. A lot of this is an avalanche awareness program. A lot of these slides are gonna feature avalanches, so surprise. But when this person gets caught, just watch how quickly they speed up as they start moving down the slope. So that avalanche broke, you know, the crown of that was a couple feet above the person caught in it. And then they had no chance to get off of that avalanche at all. And you saw by the end of that video wasn't sped up on our part or anything, but you saw just how quickly they started moving. And given the right slope and nothing blocking the way, an avalanche, you'll speed up to within about 25 to 30 seconds. You can speed up to potentially around 70 miles an hour. I don't care who you are, you're not skiing away from a 70-mile-an-hour avalanche. That is just so fast. So again, staying out of it in the first place. Where are we worried about these? Well, if we're looking up at a big mountain and we see these big paths devoid of trees, you know, it's pretty easy to assume, okay, that's probably an avalanche path. I think a lot of us have looked at things like that and had a similar thought. And then the same kind of thing with these big wide open slopes, right? You know, this person maybe hiked up here, they might have gotten dropped off by a helicopter or something. But I think we can look at these huge, massive mountains and think, yeah, that's potentially avalanche terrain. So what's interesting is this one on the bottom left. Now, this is the site of a fatal avalanche from about 15 years ago. It was a group of snowshoers, and as you can see, they were only a stone's throw, maybe 50 feet away from the road. And unfortunately, they triggered an avalanche. They were swept downhill, and a young woman was buried face down in the creek. Sadly, by the time they were able to get to her and dig her up, she did pass away. Now, similarly to how the avalanches don't care what it is that you're doing out there, they don't care about how close you are to perceived safety, in this case, the road. The reason this is so important is that a lot of avalanche accidents happen right outside of ski resorts. And there's this idea that because we're close to a ski resort, that must equal safety because of all the hazard mitigation that, you know, ski patrollers and other people are doing, but that happens inside the resort. So if you happen to be skiing over here in North America, inbounds, there's a lot of control work done, and we'll kind of show how some of that is done. Outside of that, and this can be when you just go outside of the ropes, like in this case right here, this one at least has a nice big sign to make it fairly clear that what is going on here. But the point is that as soon as you step beyond the boundaries, you're out of bounds, and it's all the same no matter how close you are. Now, skiing over in Europe, where many of you are lucky enough to be skiing, it's a little bit different. I think the culture, there's probably a larger percentage of people skiing around with avalanche gear. The on-piste, off-piste is maybe, it's handled a little bit differently. I know control work is done differently over there as well. So the point is that it's important to learn kind of the expected customs and what's expected of you when you go out and ski other places other than your home mountain. What kind of control work are we talking about? Well, inbounds, or at least nearby, you're going to have professionals either throwing bombs or doing ski cutting maybe, or maybe shooting these howitzers to create avalanches. But I don't know a lot of people that ski in the backcountry with a backpack full of dynamite. Frankly, I'm not sure that I would want to ski with that person. It doesn't sound all that safe. So let's leave that to the professionals. But remember, there's a lot of work going into that. But what does that look like? So this is a pretty large charge that was put into this snowpack, and then you can see it creates this huge violent avalanche. There's already debris at the bottom. This tells me that they're probably bombing this regularly, but it just shows you how much work is going into control work, and then how there's none of that work going into controlling where we're going to go backcountry skiing, which does make for good skiing. So similar how we were talking about avalanche can come in all different areas. It's all, this one in the middle here, again, pretty obvious, right? We've got these big slide paths, particularly back here, these kind of wide open things. I think most of us that have spent time in the mountains kind of look at this and see potential avalanche hazard if we're at all aware of avalanches. So what I would look at if it was a dangerous day is to go ski something a little more mellow, kind of similar to what we have over here on the left. Now, the problem is that even within mellow terrain, we can have micro terrain features that can cause problems for us. We'll talk about the consequences of different features here in just a second. But then when we look at this one on the right, it looks like maybe we have a little spin drift, some wind bringing some snow transport from the back of this ridgeline to the front. And that's created a little bit of a wind slab right here. And it looks like just enough to either go on its own, or possibly this was skier triggered. I'm not 100% sure. But just to show you that this does not look like gnarly terrain, but it's enough of a wind loading and enough of a slope change. What do we mean by slope change? Well, we're talking about the steepness of a slope. Now, a lot of, well, pretty much all avalanches are going to happen between 30 and 45 degrees. That's what we'll call the avalanche sweet spot. Unfortunately, as many of you are aware, I'm sure, between 30 and 45 degrees is also a real sweet spot for some great skiing. So above 45 degrees, also fun skiing, but it's generally too steep for the snow to stick in a large enough quantity that we're worried about the slide. It'll tend to just kind of slide and slough off during the storm cycle itself. When it's below 30 degrees, it's not usually steep enough to slide. You'd be really hard pressed to get anything to move. So it's really important that we remember this for when we do have slightly elevated danger days. It's not that we can't ever go play in the backcountry. It's just that maybe we have to stick to lower angle slopes. So the next question I frequently get is, how do we know what the slope angle is? Now on your phone, you can download apps that work as little inclinometers. I do have that, but I also don't like to rely on phones or in the backcountry nearly as much. And a lot of the time I just want to have it off, or maybe not even take it with me. So what I have is this cool little thing. If you can see up on my screen there on my camera, it's just a little inclinometer thing. And it's I've had this for almost 20 years and it's super light. I put it in my pocket, but I can lay my pole on the slope and check out what the slope angle is. It's not that I'm doing this every single time I ski any slope at all, but I've done it, do it over time. And like anything, you start to sort of develop an eye for the slope angle. So I can go out there and I'm mostly just looking for things under 30 degrees or over, just to be able to determine whether or not I think it could slide. So talked about potential starting zones within 30 and 45 degrees, and also the sweet spot of skiing as these people found here, right? Well, so they did ski this day. It does look like fantastic turns, but it's important to remember that, again, that slope that looks like really good skiing is potentially a slide zone as well. So if it were a higher danger day, I would not want to drop in where these people did, and I would advise other people not to. which would mean that we would be going for something on the side here, maybe, right? Where it's a little bit lower angle, it's a little more treed. Those trees do provide a bit of anchor to the slope. Although if it's spaced out enough for you to ski through, it's generally not the best anchor, but it is something. Now, the problem with this is that locally connected terrain, you could be skiing over here, and the energy that you are imparting to that snowpack, depending on the conditions, could actually translate over to this steeper terrain and cause it to slide remotely. And that's actually what happened in all 4 of these shots. This one, again, was snowshoers. I promise I'm not picking on snowshoers. Those are just some of the photos that we happen to have in this slide presentation. I did say we would revisit this photo. This is one of my favorite photos because I like to try to imagine what's going through this person's head right here. You know, they were up on this, it looks like to me, they probably came along this sort of flatter ridgeline right here. And they were thinking to themselves, oh, I'm not on a steep slope. It's the slope that I'm on is less than 30 degrees. But then you look, their energy was then transmitted through that snowpack to something that is over 30 degrees, and they were able to remotely propagate this slide. Imagine had they been 8 to 10 feet closer to the person taking this photo, probably would not be having such a good day. And I would imagine they were probably pretty freaked out this whole day anyway. Oh, so now it's really important that we be thinking about when we're going around, is an avalanche possible? That is definitely something I want to be thinking about. What's the danger level for the day? But then also, if I am to get in an avalanche, what is going to happen to me? What's around me that I could run into? Well, if we have big, large slide paths like this one, I think that's kind of obvious, right? We watched that video of that bomb and that went really fast and it was a ton of snow. It's not hard to imagine how that's going to work, right? Similar to trees. Trees prevent a couple problems. One, if you get enough speed and you hit a tree, well, we've all bumped into things at low speed. You can imagine doing it at high speed. The other issue with trees is that even an isolated little tree like this, if you were to get run into right there, say, pinned in the tree, the snow could pile up around you. It doesn't have to be that deep. That snow is going to set up like concrete and you won't be able to move. And then cliffs and rocks. I mean, I think it's kind of common sense that if you get swept over a cliff band or smashed into rocks, like you're going to have a bad day. So what's really interesting to me is this one right here. And we talk about skiing mellower terrain on more dangerous days. And while this does look like mellower terrain, it is in some ways. This slope on the right side here is definitely steep enough to slide. And if it were to slide, we're going to come to rest right down here. And because of the steepness of this transition, the snow is going to pile up deeper than it otherwise would. So it doesn't have to be a long, violent ride to present problems for us. So really important to remember. Now that we have some idea of some of the potential consequences out there, how are these avalanches actually forming?
Snow, that's been getting laid down all winter under different conditions, temperatures, winds. That's what forms layers, and that's where avalanches happen. So the day you're going to show up with your friends, you better be aware there's way more going on in the snowpack than...
So as we get different storm cycles throughout the season, and hopefully we'll get another one here soon. We've been in a bit of a dry spell for a little over a month here. But as we get different storms, usually throughout the winter, they're going to lay down different types of snow. We also might get, say, a warming event. Like, for instance, we could have a bunch of snow and then it heats up and we get some nice bluebird skiing, but maybe we get a little bit of a melt on the top and then at night it freezes and maybe we get some fresh snow on top of that, but then maybe we get some heavy snow. Now, all of a sudden we're building up these different layers throughout the snowpack. With the right combination, we're then going to create weak layers. And let's take a look at some of the issues created by these weak layers.
When I'm walking around in the mountains, I like to think of weak layers like a great white shark lurking just beneath the snow surface. You always need to be thinking, what's underneath me? Take this cross-section of the snowpack. You may be walking in a flat meadow, and get the weak layer to collapse, and it might make a really loud noise. But the snow didn't move anywhere. That's a huge red flag. In fact, you just triggered an avalanche. That same snowpack, if you were to tilt it up to say 35 degrees, will slide with deadly effect.
So those weak layers are down there, right? Oh, bam. Let's take a look at one here. And this one, I'm still going to talk about it, but I think it's somewhat self-explanatory. Let's take a look at here that somebody dug.
Standing on just this bomber snow, but as I drop right here, look at that. I mean, it doesn't even hold my glove. This stuff is really weak.
Okay, even without the fancy graphics from that previous slide, I'm pretty sure we could all figure out that if you had that weak little sugar snow down there, right, and this big cohesive slab on top of it, if you turn that up and jump onto it with your skis or snowboard, I don't think it's that hard to figure out what's going to happen, right? So this is just another spoiler alert. There's going to be an avalanche. Skilled skier here. Watch when they recognize they do recognize what's happening pretty quickly, and then they try to get off the avalanche. But watch just how quickly the avalanche propagates. So you saw how that they triggered it, and then it moved all the way around and was way faster than the skier moving in the same direction. And it's not an unskilled skier by any means. The real takeaway for me here is that we cannot count on just jumping off or getting away from the avalanche. That does happen, but it's a matter of luck. It's not a matter of just being better than the mountains. Like, you try to play that game, eventually you'll lose. So again, avoidance and understanding and recognizing where these things are happening. Right here, we're going to watch the 4 ingredients for an avalanche and just how those interact here. Remember how we talked about being able to remotely propagate? This one's not super far, but when that one actually triggered, I mean, that crack did eventually form, but there wasn't even a crack going out from that snowboard tip to where the avalanche went. So it just shows you just how far easily your energy can travel through the snowpack. So when we're out there, these are the 4 ingredients for an avalanche. We need a slab, we need a weak layer for it to break on, we need a slope between 30 and 45 degrees, and we need that trigger, which is generally us. Now, the beauty of this is that we have direct control over 2 of the 4 triggers, or sorry, 2 of the 4 ingredients. Those 2 being the slope and the trigger. We're the trigger, we can just choose not to be there. And then there's the slope. We get to choose what slope we're on. So again, higher danger day, choose a better slope. Not telling you not to ski, because then I'd be a hypocrite. I go out all the time too. We're just trying to get you to choose appropriate terrain for the day's conditions. So what are we going to do to start? We're going to first get the gear, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but then we're going to get that training. And the reason for this, it kind of goes hand in hand with this next slide. Of people that die in avalanches, about a quarter of them are going to die of trauma. That's being hit into trees, rocks, tumbled over something, what have you, right? And then the other 3/4 are going to die of asphyxiation, trapped under the snowpack. Now, why is this important? And why does it go so much with the training and the gear? Well, about 60% of people that die of asphyxiation in there are going to die within the first 15 minutes. 90% are going to be dead within about 40 minutes. What this means is that the people we are with are the only, and ourselves are the only rescue that we can depend on. Organized rescue will not get to you in time to help. which is why it's so important that everybody you're with have proper gear and understand how to use it. So these, again, are the 3 essentials that you should really never go backcountry skiing without. We've got your beacon here. The nice thing is all beacons work off the same 457 kilohertz frequency, give or take 80, but they all play nice together. They're all going to work, and they're all generally about the same type of function. They just have some slightly different, they're going to have turn on different ways. They're going to have some different bells and whistles. Avalanche probes, you just want to make sure that you get a nice sturdy one that's long enough, something between about 2 and 3 meters. And then I like ones that have little centimeter markings on them because I like to know how deep I'm probing. It's also kind of a tool. You're going to use this to figure out over the snow level. That's going to tell you the minimum depth that the person is buried. The probe is then going to know if you're kind of in that right zone. Now the shovel, something collapsible. I like one with an extendable handle, but a metal blade is super important. Excuse me 1 second. All right. So these are the 3 essentials that we always want to make sure that we have. Now, other pieces of gear. Airbags have gotten a lot more popular, and they are incredibly effective. There's a rough estimate that about half of people that die in avalanches, if they had airbags, possibly could survive. It's tough to get definitive data on this. These Reco reflectors, you might have these in your pants and jacket and not even know it. They're actually usually sewn into the lining. Really cool devices. We'll go over how these work in just a second. They are not a replacement for a beacon. They're just an additional tool. Helmet, it's just a good idea to have a helmet when you're out skiing. It could be user error. I've certainly run into things with my head before and been glad I had a helmet. So it's just kind of a good idea. Warm clothing. This is going to be determined, at least for me, by how long I think I'm going to be out there. If I'm going out for a couple hours before work just to take the dog out or something, I'm not going to bring all of the clothing. If I'm going out for a full day or possibly multiple days, I might have 3 or 4 pairs of gloves sometimes. I hate cold, wet hands. A first aid kit. Now, a first aid kit is like any other tool. It's exactly as good as the person using it. So it's really important that you have one. It doesn't matter if you have the most expansive one. You just want one that you know how to use. Open it up, see what's in there, play with things like, pull it out, look at stuff, make sure you know how it's going to be used. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Communication devices. Depending on where you're at, a lot of the time cell phones work these days in the mountains. You can think of that what you will. Those are a great device. A quick note on phones, they will interfere with the signal from your beacon. So I like to either keep my phone off or leave it at the car, or sometimes I'll leave it in airplane mode if I think I'm going to need it or take pictures. But frankly, I don't need to be making phone calls when I'm out there unless it's an emergency, right? We go to the backcountry for solitude and get away from all that. Couple others, radios. Radios are really cool. They're going to be really nice in a rescue situation. They're also just nice to have with your partner. Maybe it's windy out there or something, and maybe somebody skis a slope and you want to say, oh, hey, when you get to this point, go more to the right. There's a better line, or you can use them for more than just rescue. So they're pretty cool. And then we've got these cool like spot locators or Garmin InReach. I'm sure there's some other ones, but these little satellite locators. Now, these are a very useful tool, but again, organized rescue is not going to get to you in time to help with a burial, so they're not a replacement for that. They are an additional help. These sort of emergency bivvy shelters or space blankets. If I'm going out for multiple days, I'll definitely have one of these with me. I don't necessarily always have them, but a repair kit. Always bringing at minimum a couple ski straps, some baling wire, some duct tape, multi-tool, and maybe some zip ties and a couple other things. And then if whatever your gear, if you have specific items or pieces that you need, go ahead and bring that as well. Even if you don't use it, you'll eventually run into somebody and you'll be able to help them. You can be someone else's hero. A fire starter, good thing to have. It's kind of could be the difference between an unsurvivable night and a really uncomfortable night. Bottom line, there's just no way to have like a comfortable, unplanned night in the backcountry. How do airbags? How are these airbags working? Well, they've got a ripcord on them, and let's see what that looks like. So these are really cool. When you feel yourself getting into an avalanche, you just reach up, you pull it. The idea is that it is increasing your volume without increasing your mass. It's like the potato chip theory. If you shake up a bag of chips, the big ones come to the top. So we're trying to make ourselves that big chip. There is some thought that it's not a bad idea to have a big cushion of air up around your head and neck. I have not seen any studies really related to this specifically, but seems like it couldn't hurt. The other thing is if you pull this and you still get buried, in theory, you might now have a larger amount, volume of air around you, or a larger chamber, potentially increasing the length of time that you can survive under the snowpack. Again, I don't think a study has been done on that one, but I could see how it's possible. So this snowmobiler just dropped into this slope, and you can actually see the avalanche already starting to crown right here, going out in front of them. They're going to get separated from their sled rather, sorry. Watch what happens when they pull their airbag. Watch what happens in the snowpack to the rider relative to their sled. So as that thing blew up around them, even as they go out of the frame there, they're at least still able to help stay up on top of that snowpack, whereas that sled just dove straight in. Now, granted, snowmobiles are a lot heavier than people, I get that, but it's still a really good example of just how much of a difference it makes. Remember, we don't have to keep our entire body above the snowpack. As long as from about our chest up is above, we're going to be in a lot better shape. So any advantage we can give ourselves to stay on top is going to help. Estimated airbags, I think I mentioned this earlier. That next piece of gear, the transceiver, what happened here, I promise again, I'm not picking on snowshoers, but, oh, all right. This was a couple snowshoers again, they triggered it. You can see that it actually entrained almost this entire valley and just scoured everything. These people did not have avalanche transceivers, and it took a dedicated crew of rescuers over 2 weeks to dig them out and find them because of that. This created a debris pile here that was so large that it did not melt out for actually 2 full summers. So, talk about that Reco system. It's those little things that are sewn into the garment itself. And these things, they're really cool. They work like a dolphin or a bat with their echolocation. It sends out a signal, it bounces back off and comes back to you. The reason these are not a replacement for a beacon, even though they do work, is because your buddy is not flying a helicopter out there with one mounted to it, and this thing would take up about half of your day touring backpack, and it's also very expensive. So it's just not a tool that people are. This is a ski patrol up in Canada using it to search for an avalanche. They've got some people ready to probe behind them. So again, really cool tool, but not a replacement for a beacon. Now, everybody's favorite avalanche rescue device, mine included, not the helicopter, it's the avalanche rescue dog. While they also will find you, it's similar to the Reco system in that it works really, really well. The problem is most of us are not lucky enough to ski in the backcountry with a trained avalanche dog. I've been trying to get my dog. He doesn't really get it unless I'm holding a piece of steak under the snow for him. And I'm just generally not skiing with hunks of meat in my hands for him. So, you know. So similar to any tool, as we talked about, all the gear works really well if you practice with it. And this can be, again, a formalized instruction in class like this one, or it can be hanging out with your buddies. It really should be both. So this is an avalanche awareness program. We highly encourage you to take a course. And after this, we're gonna have some local experts from your area kind of talk a little bit about where you can find some more resources dedicated to increasing your avalanche education. Because again, this is the stepping stone, the starting point. This is not the end of it. In fact, your avalanche education should last, hopefully, the rest of your long skiing life. Some things you'll learn in various avalanche classes: how to travel in terrain, how to choose terrain. So some of the things we're talking about tonight, this morning, wherever, but a lot more in depth. One of the things that I think is really important that classes will often touch on, but I think is worth talking about, is making smart decisions as a group. I often get asked about what is the optimal group size for the backcountry. And I would say 2 or 3 people. I am willing to go up to, depending on conditions, I'm willing to go with a little bit more and the situation. You know, maybe we're just going out, staying on super mellow terrain. Fine, we can have some more people, especially if it's more of a learning day. If we're going to travel into anything more intense, more consequential, I'm going to try to stick to that 4 or less. Now, part of this is that part of it has to do with group decision making. Anytime you get more than about 3 or 4 people, then in a stressful situation, group decision making starts to break down, and an avalanche is absolutely a stressful, situation. So we've gotten the gear, we've started practicing with it. Next thing is going to be to get the forecast from your local resources. And again, we will touch on your available local resources here in a little bit. But that's going to allow us to get the picture. And getting the picture can also be, we're just paying attention to our own area. You know, if we know that there was this particular storm event a week ago, and we dig down and we look and we can see a layer, well, that's getting us the big picture. By understanding what's going on, that lets us get out of harm's way. Again, best way to avoid getting hurt in an avalanche, avoid being in that avalanche. If you do happen to be skiing over here one of these days, go ahead and check out these sites, but there are some other resources for where you're at. The avalanche danger scale is a little bit different outside of North America, I believe. However, it is pretty similar in that it starts with this sort of like stable, safer snowpack up to one where you really shouldn't be on any sort of consequential slope at all. So I'm just going to touch on this a little bit. The vast majority of avalanches, fatalities, actually happen at these lower levels. And I'm not concerned with the numbers because, again, you might be looking at a different rating system. I'm looking more at the overall kind of mentality of this. So extreme danger. Say, I'm going to illustrate this one with just a kind of a little story here. Say we're up in our backcountry cabin and we're getting a ton of snow and we're excited to go skiing, but we wake up and we maybe do some tests and we realize, okay, this snowpack is it's extreme danger. I'm not going out. So you make a long breakfast, you just kind of while away the time, you're having fun, you're shoveling a bit, you're hanging out, whatever. The next day you wake up and you determine, you know what, this is still kind of high danger. I don't think it's good. I'm going to wait another day. Now, the next day you wake up, the danger seems less, but it's still there. We'll call it considerable danger, right? But it's less than high, it's less than extreme. But if you needed to cross the street and I told you that there was a considerable chance of getting hit by a bus in that spot, would you do it? I hope not. And in that case, I think you'd walk down the street, you'd find a crosswalk or something, you'd hit the thing, you'd then cross when it's safe. And in this case, our safe crosswalk is going to be those lower angle tree slopes. So we talked about anything under 30 degrees, if we have considerable avalanche danger, or really any avalanche danger, maybe we're sticking to those lower angle trees for the day. Some of the things we're going to talk about in general in forecasts are going to be slabs, or any sorts of problems going on. Now, when we're out on the slope, it is really important that we be paying attention. We're keeping our head on a swivel. we're thinking about different things, different danger signs. Just because there's tracks out there does not mean it is necessarily safe. It could slide with the first tracks on it. It could also slide with the 100th tracks, or in this case, the 5th track. Just because there's other ones doesn't mean it's necessarily safe. What's the most obvious sign? Well, this one is nature's freebie. It's an easy one. It's recent avalanches. If I'm looking up at a north-facing slope that's about 35 degrees and I think, oh, that looks real fun, but then I look over here and there's another north-facing 35-degree slope that has recently slid, it's a pretty good sign that that first one I was looking at is probably not safe and I should probably go find something else to ski. The next one is going to be cracking or collapsing. It doesn't have to be on a big slope. This could be on our way to it. If we're getting these shooting cracks out in front of our skis, that's a pretty good sign that once we get onto a steeper slope, it's also going to be doing that. And I do not want to be anywhere near a slope above 30 degrees if that's what I'm seeing. The last one, the one that's not on here, but is this sort of whumping sound, and you can actually get an entire snowpack to sort of settle under you. And it is a very disquieting feeling. And if I have any of these three things happening, I am going to turn around if I can safely do so. Recent wind drifting. So in this case, we had the wind was blowing from the right side over to the left. It was depositing snow on this lee side over here. But if you think of this house as being a ridge line, for instance, if we're walking right along this, if I knew that the wind was coming, I now know that there's a bunch of added weight on this snowpack. The weight of me dropping onto that with my skis or board or snowshoes or whatever could be enough to send this for a ride. So similar to wind drifted snow adding weight, just enough heavy snowfall. Out here in California, we're close to the ocean. We tend to get pretty heavy snow. So a lot of our main danger is during that snowpack. Unfortunately, because we sometimes ski low elevation stuff, we sometimes get rain. In addition to the fact that rain is just not that much fun to ski in, it also is adding weight to the snowpack. So that's going to create danger. So if I have any of those things, maybe I think twice about where I'm going for the day. Now, the last one is going to be because of rapidly rising temperatures. This one is especially prevalent in the springtime when we get higher temperatures and higher swings from night to day. You'll often see this if there's like rocks on a west-facing slope, for instance, in the afternoon. Those rocks are absorbing that solar energy, releasing it into the snowpack, then causing these spontaneous little slides. Sometimes they look like little fans. Sometimes they look like these roller balls or pinwheels. Either way, these in and of themselves are not dangerous, but they are a good sign that the snowpack is losing stability and it's time to head home for the day. And again, this is all just us paying attention to what's going on around us, developing that sort of ski tourer's eye, right? So we're just kind of taking all of this in until it's second nature. How do we stay out of harm's way, get out of harm's way? Well, one of those ways is going to be to think about where we stand in relation to other people. We cannot remove 100% remove risk from the equation. That's just the nature of being in the mountains, but we can mitigate it. One of those is through safe travel techniques. This is the site of a big avalanche that happened in 2013. And these people knew that there was some avalanche danger for the day, but they were actually traveling. They were about 50 to 80 feet spread out along the slope, which often is enough. In this case, it was not. 6 of them were caught, 5 were buried and killed, unfortunately. And you can actually see just how deep they were buried. So traveling one at a time applies to if we're snowmobiling, say we're high marking like this, trying to get up there and see how high we can get up on the snow. Don't stand under the run out zone, similar to this one. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks to me like this person went first, was now waiting down here for their buddy who then triggered this. Now, because they didn't get out of the way enough, they're then caught. So now we've gone from well, we'll show you in the next one here as well. Couple issues with what's going on here on the left. They had a nice, relatively safe point of travel up this shoulder. The other advantage here is they could have done some more switchbacks, practiced their kick turns, really worked on their technique, but instead they chose to move out onto this much less protected, much more open, avalanche-prone slope. I don't know the conditions for the day, so I'm not going to sit here and armchair quarterback this one too much. But if you have the chance, it looks like you're going to the same place up here anyway, try to stick to a safer path of travel. Now, what's going on over here? Remember we talked about it could be the first person on the slope, it could be the 100th person, it could be the 8th person on this slope. Looks like we got a group of 4 people. They went up for their second lap. The first one was great, so they've decided on a second one. Can't blame them. We got the 4th person coming down right here. The problem right here is not even necessarily the choice of terrain, it's where these people chose to group up. Now, if this person triggers a slide, we've now gone from a situation with potentially, we've now gone from a situation with potentially 1 person buried and 3 rescuers to now theoretically 4 people buried and 0 rescuers. I think it's fairly obvious which side of that equation we'd all rather be on, right? So really be thinking about, similar to the consequences of if there's a slide when I'm skiing, that other one that I showed you with trees and rocks, but similar to that, think about what happens if this person triggers a slide. Find a spot to group up and wait that is not going to put you in harm's way. Similar to not putting yourself or your group into harm's way, you want to be thinking about what is going on around you, the bigger picture here. In this case, this is a site of a fatality. Somebody's house was actually hit by an avalanche. And, you know, they're in there making their morning coffee. And sadly, an avalanche came and just ripped apart half their house right here. I can't imagine that was on their agenda for the day. And similar to these people on this road, this was out in Colorado. Fortunately, no one was actually hurt, although this road was blocked for about 8 hours. Not immediately life-threatening, but you better believe that's pretty annoying and could prevent medical care or something like that, just depending on the situation. So really just be thinking about the overall impact of what it is that you're doing out there. So you want to get out there and get after it, and I know that we all do, in whatever way we're enjoying it. Don't forget extreme snow angeling, everybody's favorite. We got to get that gear. We got to train with that gear. We're getting the forecast, where that's going to get us the big picture, and that's going to allow us to get out of and stay out of harm's way, the most important thing. So a big thank you to all of these organizations, in particular the Nickolay Dodov Foundation. We are lucky enough to be joined by the founders today, this morning, this evening, however you want to look at it, and I'm sure they might say a couple words here at the end as well. So that is it for that portion of the presentations. But I did mention we're going to be joined by some local experts for you who are going to touch on some resources that you have out there, some spots to maybe further your avalanche education.